Thank you all for joining us for live Q&A with Dr. Michael Miller from the Just Tech program at SSRC. This session is a complement to the bite-sized lunchtime talk you've already watched. It's my pleasure to introduce Yandu Mori, our alumni legacy TF, who will introduce our speaker.
So Michael Miller is Program Director for the Social Science Research Council's Just Tech program and Media and Democracy program. He received his Ph.D. in political science from the City University of New York, where he researched censorship, surveillance, and propaganda in China. He was a 2018 to 2020 Mellon ACLS Public Fellow. Prior to joining the SSRC, he taught political science at Hunter College and Hostos Community College of the City University of New York.
All right, let's jump in, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us. You are officially our first bite-sized lunchtime talk speaker for 2022. I think that is fantastic and very much so is amazing given the work that you do and the opportunities sort of within your tutelage. So I think our students, our participants, junior faculty, PhD students, and our postdocs are very excited to learn more about Just Tech, which is both a platform and a fellowship. So maybe we could kick off before we get into the details of that to learn a little bit more about how you got involved with tech and social justice. And a bit about what shepherding this platform and this fellowship means to you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Great to be with everyone in the SICSS community, especially at the Mecca, Howard University this summer. So, I mean, my route to this work is, I think, a little bit circuitous. As Yandu mentioned at the top, my own PhD, I'm a political scientist by training. I did my research on, yeah, she mentioned censorship and surveillance in China, and really about information control. And that's relevant because at the time when I was doing my research, you know, right around the time of the Arab Spring, I think this was like the heyday of kind of tech liberation work, right? Where folks thought as long as people had access to the internet, access to social media in particular, they were just going to find information and be able to share information and topple regimes. And in a sense, the Arab Spring kind of gave everybody the outcome that they wanted, or at least that the folks who think that tech can do all things for all people thought. So I started my research at that time, and because Chinese was my best second language, I'm a comparativist, and Chinese was my best other language other than English. So I was studying China and studying digital media in China, and realizing around that time that actually China, the state in China, was innovating ways to control its society, despite increasing access to social media, to the internet and to social media, and in China's case, many domestic forms of social media. So I think I came to this with the idea in mind, which is the idea that many of the folks in the Just Tech Network have in mind, that technology does not always work as designed, and that it doesn't always bring people more power, much less liberation. And so, my own research is on states and how states try to control their societies. And I think, even just looking at China, you recognize that folks in China experience technology in very different ways. If you're a member of the Uyghur ethnicity, your experience with technology, with surveillance technology, with facial recognition technology is significantly different than if you're a member of the dominant ethnic group in China, the Han Chinese, right? Now, how I got to the SSRC is another story altogether. But I did land at the SSRC, and I started in a program called the Media Democracy Program, which broadly speaking tries to understand how innovations in media technology are shaping politics. And that work led to this work with Just Tech, and which is more, I think, narrowly focused, not just on the effect that innovations in media technology have on power and society, but also the kind of disparate impact that those changes may have, and how technology can, be an unalloyed good for some groups, and an unmitigated threat for other groups. And that's, and you can't just predict that by the technology. You have to think about things like the social context within which technology are deployed, and for whom, and how. And I think the conceit, the premise of Just Tech is that if we don't invite more people in to do this work, especially the people who experience technology in ways that weren't necessarily imagined by the folks who designed the technology, we're going to have major blind spots, and that will be to the detriment of those folks, again, for whom technology is not always imagined with them in mind. So I think that answers part of your question, but let me know if there's something else.
No, I appreciate that. So I have to ask an aside question. You said, and I quote, "My best second language." How many languages do you speak?
Oh, I should. Yeah. I mean, I don't speak any language as well, but
Imposter syndrome. How many languages have you studied? How about that?
Chinese and Spanish.
Okay, cool. Are there any other ones in there that you're not telling us about?
I wouldn't characterize that as study.
Okay, are there any others that you dabble in? How about that? Do you dabble in any other languages, brother? You're evading the question.
No, there are not.
Okay, we'll talk about that offline. All right,
Yeah.
can you, so I saw, he's just like, oh, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Sanskrit. All right, so can you talk a little bit about the Just Tech Fellowship? So I saw a video up, Ruha Benjamin, I think, was talking about the fellowship, if I'm correct, but I waited to watch it. I didn't want to watch it. I wanted to hear from you. So can you tell us about this fellowship class? What sort of unites them? Like, what are the similarities? What are the differences? And a little bit about what it took to pull this together. So I love looking at your advisory board. It is my fantasy academic team of Black women. If I was to have Black women, baseball card, like academic trading cards, it is like everyone. LaTanya's up in there, Timnit's up in there, Brandeis is in there, Ruha, Safia. It's amazing. So can you tell us about what it took to pull this off and about the class a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm glad you waited to watch the video that includes Ruha and Safia and Nabia Syed, because if you had watched them first and then listened to me talk about it, you'd be very disappointed, because they're gifted speakers.
I'm going to interrupt you and repeat to everyone what I said to you privately, which is, you say that, but you remind me of Barack Obama. Okay, so everybody else is like, does he not give you cool Barack Obama energy? Okay, so I'm not going to let you. Well, we'll talk about the language stuff later, and we'll, and also about this public speaking thing, because I think you have a gift as well.
This is how the net gets people to come.
I'm honest. I'm from New York, so I'm honest. Go ahead.
So, I mean, this has been a thrill. And maybe I'll say a little bit about the process first, because I think, folks may know at this point that we did announce last week our first cohort of Just Tech Fellows, 6 individual social researchers. And they were selected from a pool of 600. We received 600 full applications. We received about 1,300 expressions of interest. And 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 then ultimately did 12 interviews to choose a cohort of 6. And so, with that number of applications, with that level of interest in this fellowship, I don't think it's inappropriate to say we had to let a lot of good folks go. There were a lot of really, really excellent applications who were not awarded a fellowship because at the end of the day, we wanted to choose a group of people whose not only their work was complementary, but their expertise is complementary. Because one of the goals of the Just Tech Fellowship, and there are several, is to communicate that there are really different kinds of people doing impactful work in this space. And despite the fact that I work for an organization called the Social Science Research Council, in fact, we know there are many other academics, humanists, computer scientists doing important work about tech and social justice. There are people who are not academics who are doing important work, research. They may not call themselves researchers, but what they do, right, is research artists, organizers, journalists, lawyers, who are asking questions about the world and then going out and gathering evidence and then communicating insight about the evidence that they've gathered to inform our understanding of how, again, tech shapes power, and tech shapes power differently for different groups in society. So that was a real challenge putting together this group, but we're thrilled with the group that we have. I'll just say their names aloud right now: Kim Gallen, Chris Gilliard, Christine Miranda, Clarence Oko, Mimi Stiles, and Rua Williams. A few of them are academics, but we have a civil rights attorney, we have a community organizer, we have in Mimi Stiles, the founder of her own nonprofit organization, which is a support organization for Black, Brown, and Indigenous-led other nonprofits, and who are in the work of creating anti-racist solutions to police interventions in society. And so Mimi's gonna spend her time as a fellow developing a new data sharing tool to help these organizations. Not only, nonprofit organizations are always collecting data about themselves, but they're not always communicating with other nonprofit organizations about the data that they collect and about the kind of key performance indicators they collect. So this, Mimi wants to develop a tool to help these organizations share their metrics with each other and compare across organizations and even collaborate with each other. I'm happy to say a little bit about each of them, but I don't want to take up too much time. I can also just share, some announcement material. But I think, of course, what unites these fellows is that each of them is thinking about a technological intervention into society that does not necessarily work as advertised, and often to the detriment of Black and Brown people, or I should say marginalized people. It's not always the case, Black and Brown people. I think that on balance, that is the case for these fellows. I know that at least one person is working specifically on disability rights, and this is a really interesting project that, thinking about the ways that many folks with disabilities have to adapt technology in order to get by in society, and there are often huge barriers to doing that, including regulatory barriers, and so this fellow will work with adaptive technology users, developers, and UX designers to kind of I don't want to say map, but just describe the constraints, and in so doing, create new adaptive technology. So there, there will be like a public exhibition of new technology uses. So this person will study the creation of new technology and then demonstrate these new technologies in order to make clear the obstacles that many folks face when trying to adapt technology.
And
Sorry,
we're looking forward. No, you're great. I love the examples. We're looking forward to our invitation to see that once that's on the calendar. You can just pass that on to me. I will pass that on to our community, and we will roll up and encourage your fellows. So we currently have 5 questions in the queue for you, which I'm excited about. So we're going to start. I'm going to pass the mic back to Yandu, who's our alumni TF from who joined us last year, who's going to ask you a couple questions. Then from there, we've got Andrea, Renee, Susanna, and Rumesa.
Okay, so I went through the Just Tech platform and like the network that's on the platform right now, and I noticed that there's a lot of professors and other professionals in academia and industry with just like a few PhD students. So I just wanted to know, like, how does someone become part of the network? And then kind of related to that, there wasn't as many people from industry. So I was just wondering, like, why you think that might be, and is there any challenges in getting people from industry involved in tech justice?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I'll say, the first thing to say about our network. And to answer your question about how you become a member of the network. So anyone represented there in our network is either someone who served on a steering committee or is a current member of our advisory board, or someone who has written or reviewed for the platform. So there are different kinds of content types on the platform, including peer-reviewed literature reviews. So if you wrote one of those reviews, or you were a reviewer for one of those field reviews, you would get a profile page. If you wrote an essay for us, or if you did an interview for us, you get a profile page there. Anyone who reviewed for the Just Tech Fellowship, right? We sent out a couple hundred applications to external reviewers before they came back to the selection committee. All those people, if they were inclined, were able to create a profile. And so all of which is a very short way of saying we didn't want the network to just be like people who we like, although it is in fact the case that we like, that we like and respect the work of all the people who are in our network, but lest it become completely arbitrary. Up until now, in order to become a member of the network, you have to do something with Just Tech, right? Maybe, and in the future that could be, sit on a panel if we organize an event, and I'm sure there are other ways that we can think of, to become a Just Tech network member. But that's where it is now. And to your point about there being relatively few PhD students and folks from industry, I think I can say a little bit about each of those. One, we'd love for there to be more grad students up there, and there are a few, and I think what we want to do in the very near future is create easier mechanisms for folks to self-nominate in the sense, like if you're writing something that you'd like to write 1,000 to 2,000 words and publish it on Just Tech, we want to make that process easier. Up until now, it's been by invitation only, but I think we want to open that up a little bit more, and that'll invite more opportunities for grad students who are doing good work and want to get their stuff out in front of the world, to write for us and to create a profile. I mean, to my mind, those lit reviews are things that grad students are doing as a matter of course, right? If you wrote a dissertation, you wrote a lit review, that could be something that we publish on Just Tech. And just so everyone's aware, we pay for everything that we publish on Just Tech. So most of us, who went through grad school had to do all that for free or for the love. And then often it sits in a library along with your dissertation, and for many of us doesn't go much further than that. So I think it'd be great if you look around the site and you think, oh, there's a gap there, and there's a gap that I could fill with something that's pretty done. We want to create a mechanism for you to be able to say, here's an abstract, here's a bibliography, here's a rough chapter outline, and then we can get working on that pretty quickly. So that expect to hear more about that over the summer. Folks in industry, I think you kind of alluded to this in your question. Yeah, I mean, there are challenges to even getting folks in industries to think about social justice questions. So, I mean, I'll say a couple of things, right? Like, what industry is, depends who you ask, right? Are we talking about all of technology and right? Does an organization, a company like Tesla, are they in there? I would think that self-driving cars, that there are justice implications to self-driving cars and that technology, but I doubt very much that there are incentives for anybody who's a researcher at Tesla to ask those questions, let alone publish that research in very public ways. I think often when we say tech in this space, people are thinking of platforms, but recent revelations about what Facebook knew about users on Instagram did not come to the light without a whistleblower. And I think that reflects the fact that, when you do research at private corporations, that research that's proprietary research, and it doesn't often see the light of day, especially if it's going to be if it's going to show that corporation in a negative light. So I think there are a few reasons why there aren't as many industry people represented there, although it's not, we're not opposed to having folks from industry represented there. And as you know, we do have a few, but I think, it's much slimmer pickings than in the academy or in journalism or, even in nonprofit. And then I guess the other thing I would say is not everybody, academics see themselves as researchers, right? This is a researcher network, but not everybody in our network would, in the first instance, describe themselves as a researcher, right? And so part of it is us making this case, and we'll continue to do so via the fellowship and via this platform, that this research space is really vast, and folks bring to bear different epistemologies and different kind of experiential knowledge, which is informed not only by demographics but also by the sector where you work and kind of your access to different kinds of data.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I deeply appreciate what you mentioned about the role of whistleblowers. Although not everyone calls her that. Timnit Gebru was one of our speakers last year. Black women and Black people don't always get the benefit of that term, whistleblower, when we step up and say things that are happening, especially in a DEI space that's for some reason disconnected from whistleblowing. But yes, so we're gonna have Andrea come forward and ask a question. After that, I will ask a question for Renee, who can't be on camera right now, then Susanna, Rumesa, and then Kevin, who is one of our recent undergraduates, will ask a question as well. Go ahead, Andrea.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here. My question is really kind of a practical one, and it is, how do you envision us utilizing the Just Tech platform in our kind of everyday life as both a researcher going forward? Because I understand that the information that you have is, like the Zotero library. That's another really exciting thing. So just question about practically, how do you want us to utilize the resources?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess in some ways it depends on where you're coming from, but in other ways it shouldn't. So one thing I'll say about the platform, and this is, we've really taken pains to help to either do the work of translation ourselves on our team, or to help authors with the hard work of translating research to accessible prose. As the academics on the call know, it's one thing to do rigorous research. It's another thing to communicate insight about that research to folks within your discipline or within the narrow, some narrow field within your discipline. It's another thing to communicate across disciplines. I know if you've ever written a grant and they tell you remove all the jargon because there's going to be people who are academics who are reading this thing, but they're not necessarily from your discipline. So all that disciplinary specific jargon, you got to get rid of it. You got to learn how to talk to intelligent people in ways that they understand. And then it's an entirely other thing to speak to, again, educated, smart people who are not academics. And that's where we tried to land. We want this to be a resource that would be as useful to someone who's a community organizer, as to a journalist, as to another academic who's not necessarily a subject expert, right? And that, given how vast this field is, and then how ubiquitous novel technology are in our lives, there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of what could be separate fields that constitute some constellation that we could call tech and social justice studies, right? And so I would say, anyone who is interested, be they an academic, be they a journalist, be they an organizer, be they someone from tech industry who just wants to dip their toes in a subject and understand who the players are, what the big questions are, and what the research base is that informs this kind of discrete topic, they should be able to come to a Just Tech Lit Review, come to an interview, come to one of these short essays, and get a sense for the lay of the land. I think if you are an academic, if you're teaching, for example, the way that you might use this is much different, right? You might assign a field review in class. You might send a student to the library to compile their own kind of annotated bibliography. But in all cases, what we want this to be, and I'll say one thing in a moment. It's a public resource, right? And that can connect people to knowledge, but can connect people to other people, and that's where I think why that network piece is really important. In this space in particular, it is important to represent not only what the research is, what the knowledge base is, but who's producing that knowledge. As Nanette said a few minutes ago, some of the folks in our network, including Timothy Gibru or Safia Noble or Alondra Nelson or LaTanya Sweeney, right? These are folks who've been doing this work a long time, and it's not by accident that these are women of color, right? It's not by accident that disabled folks are asking questions about technology that I don't, right? And it's important for us to demonstrate who these people are and make these connections. One thing that we can do is say, these are folks who we know, right? And if you're a journalist and you're doing a story about X, Y, or Z, like, these are folks who we can put you in contact with. And if you you know, grad student, you know, all of you early career scholars and grad students, you know, you're carving out your own little niche about which you are soon to be the leading expert on subject X. Write up a short essay and let us put a profile up on you so that when a journalist is looking for background, they can reach out to you. You know, we would love to make those kinds of connections, and we think, yeah, we're positioned well to do that, and the network will help us to do that.
So we have a question from Renee. I'm not sure if she can come on camera, so I'll pause for a second. If she can, we will spotlight her. Okay, I will go ahead and ask her question. So she said, you may have covered some of this already, but my question is, in the video you alluded to tech usually moving fast and breaking things in the process. What are some anticipated community project the fellows will be working on specifically in healthcare? So can you, if you haven't explained one in healthcare, or if there isn't one in healthcare, we were hoping you'd talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one that's specifically, I guess there's two kind of, but so Kim Gallen is a professor, a historian. She was at Purdue for quite a while. We've got to update her bio, I see now, because she's going to be at Brown this fall. Her project is going to think about health IT. So like electronic systems that healthcare professionals and patients use to store, share, and analyze health data information that themselves can exacerbate inequity. And I think one of the goals that Kim has, and she's going to do things like investigate health IT legislation, such as the HIPAA Act of 1996 and the HITECH Act of 2009. And, you know, one of the things that Kim wants to do, and I think one of the projects that she's been working on since the beginning of the pandemic, it's called COVID Black, which is about telling, this in particular was about telling the stories of African Americans affected by COVID-19 and giving, you know, allowing them to use their own voice to tell these stories. But her project ultimately is to, this is my paraphrasing, but to help folks to understand how health technology is collected, health data is collected about them and used in order that they can become better, what she calls data stewards. So that's one. I think the one that I described earlier is not necessarily about the healthcare system, but it certainly implicates access to health sustaining technologies, or, you know, health infirming technologies, as the case may be. And that's the one I was describing about working with adaptive technology users to adapt technology and to think about the kinds of constraints that place undue burdens on folks who need these technologies to go about their lives, but are often constrained by regulations and other barriers. Sorry if that doesn't completely answer your question, but
No, dude, that was great. So we're going to have Rumesa and Susanna both ask their questions so that we can continue getting questions through on a queue. You've got a queue, man. There's lots of interest. So Susanna, can you go first, and then Rumesa ask your question, and then we'll have Mike Mill answer both of them.
Yeah, you do mention some of these because you said that some of the Just Tech Fellows were chose because of their complementary expertise and research topic. But I was wondering whether you could talk more about what will make a strong application, what will be something that, if we were interested, what that we should make sure to address.
Yeah, That's a great question.
Oh, let's get Rumesa's question in there too quick.
Yeah, sure,
Rumesa, go ahead. Yeah.
I actually just found on this JUST fellowship. By the way, I'm joining here from Turkey. I just found this JUST fellowship application, but I was about to ask whether it's open to non-US residents like me living in Turkey, or as I saw now, it's not. But I just asked what other options can be, but it's just so global issue that you are dealing with.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll take the second question first, because it's I don't want to say it's easier, but there is an answer. Yes. The first competition was open only to folks residing in the United States. The reason for that was we mostly because of cohort effects. You know, we want to, excuse me, we don't want to just give folks a bunch of money and then say, go off and do stuff and we'll see you in 2 years. We really want these folks to be able to meet together regularly, if not in person, virtually, but and you know, appreciating the fact that even within the United States, we're in the continental United States, we're in 3 different time zones, and if you broaden out wider, it can be difficult to organize people and to get people to convene on a regular basis together. And this is, you know, to begin to answer the first question, yeah, this was a really important thing for us, was to put together groups of people who, again, you know, approach questions about tech and justice from really different epistemological bases, because we think that that is not only important to communicate to the world how many different kinds of people are doing this research, but also because a cohort that is diverse in that way is better positioned to challenge each member of the cohort. You know, and I know this well from my work in my other program, Media and Democracy, which a lot of the work is putting together workshops, interdisciplinary workshops of folks who think a lot about one specific topic, like trust in democratic institutions, or whether or not folks are being radicalized through their use of social media. But we often put together historians and political scientists and social scientists and maybe a computer scientist, and we put them in the same room. And a lot of what is most generative about the conversations is that folks can point each other to different literatures, can I think question the deeply held biases of different disciplines. And so we really wanted folks to come from different spaces and from different walks of life in this cohort. Now, I think the main question in that first question, what makes an application competitive? I mean, this should go without saying, but it didn't necessarily. It should be about novel technology, one, and it should be about justice. And to put a fine point on that, right? It should say your project should say something about the differential impact of technology in society, and how that may be a benefit or a detriment to people on the basis of group identity. That was important. I think a lot of people came to this and had really important things to say about novel technology. A lot of people came to this and had really important things to say about social justice and inequity in society, and kind of try to pigeonhole one or the other on top of the other component, and that was an issue. I think the other thing is, we wanted to ensure that folks were at a point in their career where they were going to be able to make use of a 2-year fellowship that's in a world that's enough money where you shouldn't have to spend too much of your time thinking about other work. So it was important for someone to be able to say, you know, I'll be able to get course release so that I only have to teach one class this semester, and maybe, you know, next year I don't have to teach any classes, or I'm going to be able to take sabbatical, or, you know, I was in industry, but I'm planning on leaving industry to like work on this for 2 years and then thinking about my next step, or you know, this it's so bound up in the work that I already that I'm doing that it's not going to be a major move for me to step over to do this work. The final thing that I'll say about these applications is that whereas we asked people to submit a project proposal, the fellowship is designed to support individuals and to create a community, which is to say, the folks who were given applications weren't given applications solely on the basis of their project. And if they decide 6 months from now, I want to do something completely different, it's up to them. These are unrestricted awards, and you know, you don't have to submit, you know, progress report. There are regular check-ins, and we want to know what you're up to. But if you know, Kim Gallen decides something in the news, you know, is making her rethink, you know, exactly how this project should go forward, you know, that's her prerogative.
Wonderful. I just put in the chat box that unrestricted money is the best money. It's so very thoughtful in the way you all have set this up. And I know you deeply investigated the MacArthur Genius Grants and also the Carnegie Grants and many of these other grants that are a lot less transparent. If you all don't know, for a lot of those things, you find out if you get it, you can't apply. So what they're doing is really disruptive and revolutionary. So we have 3 questions left and about 7 minutes. So we're going to try to squeeze them all in. So the first is from one of my undergraduate event staff members. So they're floating around. They usually don't have their cameras on, but I try to make opportunities for them to engage. Kevin is also looking for an internship and lives in DC. So just throwing that out there. Go ahead, Kevin. Ask your question.
Yeah, so there's a possibility for American media to characterize Chinese surveillance as this caricature that's kind of conflated with Chinese authoritarianism without actually understanding the complex political and legal textures to China as a society. So as a scholar who has extensively studied Chinese surveillance, what would you say is the difference in perception of surveillance by Chinese nationals compared to those of Americans? And what is the differential impact of Chinese surveillance, say, between migrant workers without hukou and ethnic minorities? And the last question would be, what would you say are the uncanny parallels between US surveillance and Chinese surveillance?
I am a proud mentor. Yes, Kevin. Can we please give Kevin some love? Thank you, Kevin. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
I actually didn't hear the third question, with apologies.
There's a third question. Yes, Kevin.
Yeah, so the third question was, what would you say are the uncanny parallels between US surveillance and Chinese surveillance?
Thank you. You got a content question for your dissertation work, and we still have 2 more questions left, giving you some brackets.
Am I waiting for those first, or
do you want, let's throw those 2 questions in there too, just in case, so we can hit all of them. So we've got Daniel and BJ who will have the last word.
Sure. My question is definitely lower hanging fruit than Kevin's question, but I was just, you know, the thematic focus of the Just Tech Fellowship is very interesting, but I think a more practical point that I find very interesting is the funding amount that you're giving in this fellowship and how it is markedly higher than pretty much any other competitive fellowship that I'm aware of as a PhD student. And so I was just curious as to what the thinking behind that amount was, or what the philosophy was there, if this is sort of, if there's an implicit critique here of the sort of livability of these other fellowship amounts that that sort of sit atop this market of funding research. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And BJ, final question.
My question is similar to Kevin, and I just want to say hello in Mandarin because I'm from Taiwan. So, 你好，我来自台湾。
Kevin is
Oh,
also
yes,
from
yes.
Kevin is also from Taiwan.
Yeah, so let's talk about China. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that.
如果台湾 well, let me answer the easy question first, and that's Daniel's question, which is, yeah, there is an implicit critique of extant funding models, and often, an award is given, but it's hard to take the award because it doesn't come with insurance, or it doesn't, you're being asked to stop doing this other work, but you get, in addition to a salary, you get benefits from through this other work, and you're embedded at an organization that has other resources available that you may not have access to. So not only are the unrestricted awards sizable, they're complemented by, they're supplemented by an award that is specifically designed for fellows to use for things like dependent care or healthcare, or in some folks' case, renting workspace or equipment, and that's really, on a fellow by fellow basis, folks decide what they need and let us know, and then they can use those funds for that purpose. So yeah, I'd say another big goal of this fellowship is to communicate that different kinds of awards structures are necessary and possible, and hopefully to bring some other folks along, if not to support Just Tech directly, although funders, if you're listening, we welcome that support, then to support the other programs that they run in similar ways. I'm going to disappoint the China watchers in the room by saying that it's been a while since I've been doing research on China, but to Kevin's question about what's similar and different about users in China and the US, I mean, first of all, these are both similarities, incredibly technically advanced societies. And that's, I think, again, in my own research, the big hypothesis 10 years ago was that when societies, when technology advances to a certain point, people are going to have access to a certain amount of information, and that is going to put so much pressure on authoritarian states that they won't be able to hold the line any longer, and that's just not been borne out to be true. And I think what's different in the case, obviously, state control of media is quite different, and I think there's an awareness of that control in China that doesn't quite exist in the United States, and there's and this is me just going off the cuff a little bit, but I think it's often presumed in the United States that if folks knew that they were being repressed or knew the level of the repression, then they would resist that. And that's not necessarily always the case, because there's a lot of other things that are that are being provided, and yeah, I think there's often an assumption of I don't want to get myself into too much hot water here. There's a presumption of naivete on the other that actually may not exist, and that goes. I think that goes in both directions. And that oftentimes, and I think that scholars of propaganda know this well, that propaganda is rarely, if ever, a one-way street where there's, there's one organization, or in the case of disinformation today, maybe even a distributed organization with a target that they're trying to manipulate. And more often than not, the target of propaganda is an active participant in a game of propaganda, wherein they, they accept some things for political reasons, either because it's useful to them for their safety or for social benefit, to demonstrate that that they understand what the official line is or what the social line is. Or because it's just not useful enough to resist that. All right, I don't think I'm going to be able to answer all of your questions, but you should feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to talk offline.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. I think your comments on China are an excellent transition point for me to mention another event that's coming up. If you're interested in disinformation and misinformation, we have a talk by Mark Dirksen from the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, which is at the National Defense University, that will be talking about some of these issues on the continent. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.